Hi, I'm Kelly Boutsalis. I'm Mohawk from the Six Nations of the Grand River. My pronouns are she, her. I am a freelance journalist and as well as a programmer for the Canadian features at the Toronto International Film Festival. I am wearing a light blue V-neck shirt. I have short hair, and I have a beautiful Christy Belcourt painting in my background.
Um, Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Taratoa Stappard talking more. Hello, everyone. My name is Taratoa Stappard. I am a writer-director. I'm the writer-director, in fact, of Mārama, which is my debut feature film. I am recording this interview from London, where I live, where I've lived for most of my life. But I was born in Hawera, Aotearoa, New Zealand. My father was English, my mother is Maori, and we whakapapa to the Ngāti Raukawa, Ngāti Toa Rangatira, me Ngāti Tuwharetoa iwi, or tribes. Um, and I am wearing a black tracksuit top. um, I have shortish black hair, and I wear glasses. Yes.
Beautiful. Well, I am very excited to get to speak to you about your incredible feature debut film. And since we are going from, script to production to screening, I would love to start out with, what was the seed of this for your first feature?
Yeah, I I would say in one word, it was my mother. But sorry, in more than one word. Um, as I said before, I was born in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but we moved away. My mum, my dad, and I moved away from Aotearoa when I was very young, like three, and we moved around quite a lot. My father had various jobs as a salesman around the world, and but my mother she was born, raised in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to Maori father and mother, and so she had more of a lived experience, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, as Maori, and she would share stories of our tupuna, our ancestors, with me on occasion, as we were traveling or living elsewhere. I think maybe in an attempt to try and connect me somehow, and to an extent it did, but really, I wasn't that interested. I was kind of divorced from my Māoritanga, my Māori, my taha Māori, my Māori side, except for through my mother, who is an exceptionally strong woman, and strong character. She was an international opera singer, in fact, until she had me, and then kind of her career faded. But sorry, so she would tell these stories about our ancestors, and perhaps because it was my mum telling these stories, I don't know, but it was the one. It was the stories about our wahine toa, our strong female Maori ancestors that interested me the most. And there was one woman in particular that kind of grabbed my attention, um, and her name was Rangiriri Strew. She was born in 1880. She had an identical twin sister called Te Raorua Strew. And the Strew twins were, by all accounts, pretty spirited young women. And by the time they were 16, so in 1896, they were expelled from their third boarding school. And their Pākehā, their non-Maori father, they had a Maori mother and a non-Maori father. Maybe that made them interesting to me as well. Similar situation to myself. Anyway, their English father disowned them, and I said, right, you're on your own. And really, the twins, the way my mother tells the story, wanted nothing more than to be able to speak Te Reo Māori, their Māori language, to be able to celebrate their culture. Um, and that wasn't something that was permitted even, never mind encouraged in the 1890s. The Maori, according to colonizers, were a dying race, so to speak, and it wasn't it wasn't something that being Maori and trying to celebrate one's cultural identity as a Maori in those days was frowned upon, to put it mildly. Anyway, in what I think was probably a fairly culturally defiant gesture at that time for two 16-year-old young women,
Mhm.
the twins took on identical mokokoai, the traditional tattoos, facial tattoos for Maori women of mana. And and they both went on to become guides in Whakarewarewa, which was an area that was becoming increasingly popular with tourists and the burgeoning tourism trade of Aotearoa. But their English was flawless. Their reo Maori was beautiful. They were wonderful singers and dancers, and they were much sought after and very popular. And later on, my great grandmother, Rangiriri, went on to lead what was called a concert party, I guess, a performing group of young wahine Maori, including my grandmother, my kuia, and my great aunt. Um, and it was called Princess Rangiriri and Her Nine Maori Maidens. And she took this group on a world tour from Aotearoa through Australia, through America. They performed in San Francisco, all the way to the UK, to England. This would have been in the 1910s. I've never been able to establish exactly when, but it would have been 1910s, maybe 1920s, maybe, I'm not sure. But what struck me is what must it have been like for my kuia, my great grandmother, to take these young Maori women to the other side of the world. Here's a staunch Maori woman with a very distinctive facial tattoo, a moko kauai. What must it have been like for her to go on that massive journey and to effectively sing and dance and entertain those people who were colonizing her people and had been colonizing her people all her life? What was that experience like for her? And, you know, as I started to think about trying to tell a story that might engage with my taha Maori, my Maori side, I thought perhaps this is a story that I could tell because that was my experience. I've lived outside of Aotearoa almost all of my life, and I could perhaps speak to a story or conceive of a story that involves. I wanted to make it about a young wahine Maori that involves a young wahine Maori being mysteriously summoned somehow all the way from Aotearoa to, as it happens, North Yorkshire, where my father was born. Anyway, and yeah, and tell that story, and then to talk about some issues that were interesting to me. The history of colonization, obviously, or the horror of colonization, but also cultural appropriation, but also identity and maybe just the search for identity. Like it felt like it's a universal question, and it's kind of what I was going through myself as I was evolving the idea and then writing the script. You know, who are we and who do we come from? That's got to be one of the most universal questions, I guess, to people. So I found myself writing these characters who, how can I put it? Who I suppose they're looking for. I mean, sorry, I wanted to celebrate and honor. I know originally these kind of unique women in our family to begin with, but gradually I sort of found myself evolving this story and thinking of other stories that center Maori protagonists, wahine Maori, mostly women protagonists, who share the key characteristic that, you know, that they are all somehow detached or displaced from their culture, like I was, but also that they're all characters who are seeking some kind of balance in their life, you know, like I am. And that's what Mārama was, and that's what my next projects are as well. But sorry, I did warn you. I'm prone to rambling on. I'm sorry.
No, no, that was all really important into finding out where your head was at when you decided to start to write this screenplay. And then I'm wondering, I mean, you've done other short films before this, and then you were approaching this story. How much of the full story that we see in the end was part of your very first draft of the screenplay?
Oh, good question. I actually think the beginning and the end are almost exactly the same.
Really?
And details within, of course, got massaged or changed or simplified, mostly simplified and reduced
Mhm.
for story reasons, but also for production reasons, basic, obvious production reasons, logistics. I tell a lie. The end was more harsh. It was more
Really?
harsh. It was, yeah, I don't know, spoiler alert, I suppose, but if anyone hasn't seen the film, look away. But no,
Yeah.
can I talk about what the end is now in the film or no?
Yes, absolutely. I think, we're talking about the whole thing, so I feel like it'd be weird if we didn't. So,
I'm
yes.
sorry. So, okay, in that case, the end that I had in my first draft had Mārama as she then is by the end of the film, very much Mārama. She's come into her identity. And instead of escaping, as it were, from the burning whare with her twin, with her mother, and with her kuia, her grandmother, she lies down in the burning whare to join them.
Oh my God. Uh-huh.
Uh, yeah, and I felt like that was the way it needed to end.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that a much wiser producer than I am said to me, don't do that, Taratoa. You're just going to piss people off. They will have sat with you and well, not with me, with your character through this
Mhm.
film, and then you're going to do that. Don't do it. And I
Yeah.
don't know. It was just where my head was at when I first wrote the first draft. It felt like the pure ending. It felt like the pure inevitable end that to join her father, her family,
Mhm.
she would need to die.
Mhm.
But I'm glad we didn't. I'm
Yeah.
really glad I changed that. Took me a while. I had to get my head around it. I was like, no, no, this is how it needs to be. And eventually people just talked me around and they were like, just don't do that. That's not going to be, no, it's not about being fun or ending on a light. Of course not. But it's just felt like that's hopeless and that
Mhm.
doesn't achieve anything. And they were right. And what we have now is an ending that allows me to think about a second and a third part to the trilogy.
There you go. The Maori cinematic universe, is that what people are, or maybe you are calling this?
I might have called it the MCU Maori Cinematic Universe, but I have to be very careful about doing that, shouldn't I?
Yes. You don't know who's listening.
I don't
Yes.
know. I don't know if that's a good idea or not to call it the MCU. Yeah. Anyway, well, I don't know about cinematic universe, but certainly it's a story that can continue, and it's been really what's the word? Affirming and fun to read these little pithy reviews that you get on Letterboxd. And I have to say, a lot of them have said, for a gothic film, this is much too short. I want more. I'm like, well, that's good. If you're leaving people with a sense of give me more, that's good. Like it's better than God, this film is so long. It needed to finish half an hour earlier. I haven't had any of those, which is probably obvious because it's 89 minutes long. But it feels like it can, I hope anyway, that people will be interested in seeing more of let's say, the three characters that are left standing at the end of Mārama. They're all due to come back in part two.
Amazing. And I would love to go further into what you saw as Mary, who becomes her true self, Mārama, by the end. What it was like writing that character.
Um, It was great. It was lovely because lovely. It was great. It felt powerful because the notes that I was getting, and sorry, I should say up front, the script is what it is because of all the input that I've had from all the experts, and whether they are script consultants or script editors or other filmmakers or cultural consultants. Um, I had a few sessions with a matikite or a seer, Maori woman. But yeah, other filmmakers and other writers have given me invaluable advice. And actually, most of them have been wahine Maori, Maori women. And that's thanks to the uh, the connections that my producers enabled me to make, with these experts. And I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Your question was, what's it like to write Mārama? Sorry. Um, it was great, and I was going to say it's been great in as much as the notes I was getting was give her more agency, make her more, make her, yeah, give her more agency. Don't allow things to happen to her, that kind of thing. So it's fun. It was like thinking of ways to make her more active that felt credible. I don't know, some people, whether you think it's credible or not, the way she acts, I kind of felt she acts credibly. Um, and so did Ariana, who played her. We talked a lot about her arc, if that's the right word for it, the character arc that she has, and how she might arrive after 73 days at sea, which was a typical length of time for that ridiculously long journey in those days, how she might arrive, what state of mind she would have been in, and how she's so quickly bowled into doing what she has to do because she doesn't have many options, which is work for this, you know, self-titled Sir Nathaniel Cole. And what she finds out in relatively quick time, how she acts on that. And it was always about action. Make her more active, make her more active. So I guess thinking back on it, maybe the first versions of the drafts that I had, things were happening to her.
Mhm.
And the notes I was getting was, please engage her, make her more active. So it was a mix between making her active without becoming some ridiculous superhero. Um, so she needed to be active, but she also needed to be credibly, a woman of color. Let's call it what it is, an Indigenous woman in Victorian England. My God, what was that like? And I think, you'd be keeping your head down a bit, wouldn't you? You'd be wary, like Peggy is, the character that she meets in the house. So, but overall, it was fun. It was so much fun writing all the characters. I had fun with all of them.
Yeah, it was definitely fun watching.
Yeah.
And I, I know that you just mentioned all of these other um, people who you made sure to, get their voices and their opinions and feedback. At what stage did they come to look at the script? Was it early drafts? Was it all throughout?
Early drafts. And sorry, if it hasn't been said, I should clarify. I only had a treatment, which was, I can't remember, like a 10-page treatment maybe, and that
Mhm.
was quite different. It was all about plot really. The treatment that I had was just about this happens, that happens, that happens. Pretty, it was all right, but it was what it was, a plotty treatment. Very little character development. But I was able to, that treatment got me onto what was then called the imagineNATIVE Indigenous Screenwriting Intensive, which was a 9-month program, really generous. There was a stipend, but most of all, with really excellent tutors and regular check-ins. The only unfortunate bit was that I was on the year 2020 or 2021 when the world stopped for COVID. So instead of being able to come out to Toronto and meet with people twice, we did it all online, but it still worked. And I credit that course or that program, if you want to call it that, with getting me to the end of my first draft. Definitely. And so already, really, I was in that super lucky position of attempting to write my first draft of my first feature film, because I'd only written short films before that, but I was attempting to do that with not, well, yeah, protection, but also support, I suppose, of all these experts on the imagineNATIVE Indigenous Screenwriting Intensive, including Eva Thomas, who was running it, who's a fabulous filmmaker
Mhm.
in her own right, and who else helped me out on that? I think it was Eva was probably the main guide, but yeah, there were great
Great.
speakers, great people on that.
And what was that experience like? How did they help you finish the project, finish
Oh,
this?
I honestly, I give them full credit for allowing me to, or to enabling me and supporting me to get to the end of my first draft, because I'd never written more than 10 or 15 pages before for short films. And it's a big jump going to a feature. But they broke it down and they sort of they we stepped it out together. And also you're not doing it on your own, you're doing it alongside there were four of us, three other participants in the course. There were two First Nation Canadians and one woman from Greenland. Pipala was her name. And sorry, the other filmmakers, Devery Jacobs and Justin Ducharme, if I'm getting his name correct. Um, and we would share our scripts and do feedback on each other's projects, and that was awesome because yeah, all three other projects were interesting to brilliant, and and I would get feedback from them as well. I think a couple of the filmmakers had written other features, but mostly we were in the same boat. So that felt very, it calmed everyone, I think, and gave us
Yeah,
yeah,
much less of a lonely endeavor, even though it was online.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, well, the online thing was fine. I mean, by then everyone was used to it. Geez, we spent that whole year online, didn't we? Ugh.
yeah, we did. We still are right
Not
now.
not a fond memory, but anyway, now we're back to hopefully some sort of reality.
Right.
But they made the course work really well. And like I say, out of that course, I through Eva Thomas, I was connected with my producer, Cook Island Maori woman called Charlene George, who works out of Aotearoa, but also has a global production company for commercials called The Sweet Shop. And Charlene had just set up at that time I guess, a division for developing features. So the timing was just fortuitous, and Eva had met Charlene at an Indigenous producers workshop in Berlin, and she connected us. And at the time, I was whakama, I was the Māori not ashamed, but a bit shy about my draft because it was a rough first draft. So when Charlene said, "Oh, can I read your feature?" I was like, "That's really, I don't want to show it to you yet, but I've got this short film that I could show you." And she was like, "Okay." So I showed her the short film script. And as it happened at the time, TV New Zealand had put out a, what do they call it? RFP, request for proposals for short films, because they were compiling an anthology of 6 Indigenous supernatural stories. They wanted them to fit a commercial half hour, so 23 minutes long. And it was pretty kind of precise because it's TV. And my short script was, I don't know, 10 pages. But Charlene thought, okay, we can build this out. We can build out this idea. And we did together, Charlene and I, and some help from TVNZ people. And that became a short film that was called Taumanu, which is a Māori word with 2 meanings. It means both to colonize, but also to reclaim. So it was a really cool title for that. Cool title. So it's a really apposite or very appropriate title for the story I was trying to tell. And Taumanu became one of these 6 short films. It was the most I'd ever had to make a film before because it was a TV budget. And I got to work out in New Zealand and shoot it in New Zealand and work with Charlene and her co-producer Ricky Lee. And actually, at that stage, Ricky Lee was in my film. She wasn't producing, sorry. She became a co-producer on Mārama. But those Wahine Māori, making that connection with them via Eva, via the imagineNATIVE program, was everything. That kind of set me off. It gave me the opportunity to make Taumanu, to work with Charlene. And then when I had, made that first draft a little less rubbish, and I was ready to show it to her, I did. And she was on straight off. She was like, okay, I want to option this. We can make this feature. And she had confidence in it and in me as a first-time feature director. So that was everything. Because I had tried to develop about 3 features, I think, previous to, maybe 4 even, previous to Mārama, over the 5-10 years, in the lead up to, whatever, in the 2010s and early 20s, but 2010s. But none of them had stuck. And, some of them we gotten really close, but one of them we got really close. And in the end, the producer ditched me for another director because the bottom line was I hadn't written any of those stories. So I was attached and I developed the stories with a writer. And I'm afraid the blunt truth is it's a heck of a lot easier to get your first feature off the ground if you've written the script yourself. I'm afraid that's what when anyone ever asks, any ideas, anything that you can advise a wannabe emerging filmmaker for their first feature, I'm like, yeah, write the script.
Right.
If you possibly can. It sounds blunt, but if you can write the script, you own that story. And if anyone likes it, you're the only one that can tell it, in theory. I mean, maybe you sell it or you option it and then they do with it something else. But if you're smart and you stick with that script or that idea, and if it's personal to you, so I guess it's 2 things. Write the script yourself, just do it. Just learn how to do it and do it. It's possible. And I would say B, make it as personal to you as you can, as you possibly can, so that it doesn't make sense to try and take it off you and give it to someone else because it's so clearly your idea or I don't know, I'm not saying it has to be your history or related to your relations, like maybe Mārama was a bit for me, but there's a way that you can personalize your script to make it yours. And I'm rambling again, sorry, Kelly.
No, all of this again was really great to know and is an answer to something else that I would have asked later on. So this
I
is
see,
great.
okay. Yeah.
Yes. But and you had mentioned earlier about logistics and, some of these things that maybe you didn't quite consider in the beginning days. So at what point were you learning that, I've seen in other interviews where you wanted to do like 3 locations and then everyone said, well, just do it in one big house. So at what point of the whole process of Mārama did you realize, oh, there's a way to simplify the logistics to make this story better?
Yeah, that's a really good example. That's one of the main examples of how, I mean, I'm biased because I did it, but I do think it improved the story. I honestly, I had it was so complicated and plotty and there was a house over here where Arthur lived, and then there was another house over there where someone else lived, and there were people were going, and there was horses between them, and it was just like, no. It's a Gothic story, and hello, Gothic stories tend to take place under one big roof. Use it, embrace it. But actually, to be honest, at that stage, I don't think I'd thought of it as Gothic yet. That Gothic came a bit later, and horror came even later. So it was in my head when I started out, it was like, I suppose it was quite a heavy drama, and sure, I was still trying to tell a story around colonization and cultural appropriation, as I said, but perhaps it was mostly about identity for me. But but it became Gothic when I finally figured out the timing, and this 1859 became the year that I centered everything around and worked out the backstory to how old would Cold have, you've got to do all these things when you're writing something historic. When was everyone born? How old were they when this thing happened? And that was all news to me. But once I got my head around that, it was really freeing, and it became this thing that, okay, well, that means that there and that. And she's 24, so she must have been born then. Oh, that means that yeah. So sorry, it's probably all really very obvious, but it was my first script, so I was figuring it out as I went along. And once I had the timing that this thing is all going to take place in 1859, it sort of was like prime Gothic period. We're in North Yorkshire. That was my decision. Again, my decision to place it right just outside of Whitby was actually linked more to Captain Cook, but because that's where he set off with the Endurance on his so-called voyage of discovery. But actually, Whitby, hello, is most people know Whitby as for Bram Stoker's Dracula. So it was peak Gothic, and sorry, so that's the one roof factor. There was something else I was going to say as well, but around simplifying things and just making it it was more about corridors or rooms rather than getting on a horse and riding across a field again. Honestly, I don't know what I was thinking, but when I first wrote it, there was so much riding around fields, it was ridiculous. And it took someone to literally say to me, every scene where you've got someone riding around on a horse, that's a half a day. And I was like, no, it won't take that long, will it? And they were like, yes, it will. And sure enough, it does. The moment you put a horse in a scene, you better allocate a half day. So if you have a horse in a scene, make sure it's really important because it just it's a time suck. And certainly the amount of scenes that I had of Mary galloping across a field or Nathaniel galloping, it was ridiculous. Cut that stuff out. And then by the time it became more about one roof, people moving through the space of this house, it was exciting to think about the house, and it got bigger and bigger, and that made sense because he's hugely wealthy. Great, embrace that fact, make it a massive mansion. But I still had too many what my DOP referred to. He was like, this is another shoe leather scene. I said, what's a shoe leather scene, Jen? It's like, it's the scene where someone walks down a corridor. It's like, yeah, but we need to establish the fact that, she's getting from the kitchen to her bedroom, right? No, it's called a cut. You just go from kitchen to the bedroom. I was like, really? These important. Anyway, those conversations saved a lot of time and a lot of money. And I'm jumping ahead again slightly, but I'll just say it now before I forget. I would say anyone that is in the fortunate enough position of going from their final draft script, as it were, to a financed pre-production period, like they know they're going to shoot something within the year or whatever. Two things. First of all, beg for as long as you can possibly get for pre-production. Definitely, the more pre-production time you have, the better. But sometimes it is what it is, and you've only got a certain amount of pre-production. So the second most important thing, perhaps even the prime important thing, I would say, and again, I took this on advice of my DOP and my editor, both of whom have done this many times before. They've made multiple features. I've never made one, so I'm listening to them. And my DOP, Jin, said, we are going to take 2 weekends, and they have to be weekends because during the week you'll always get pulled away on something else. And we're going to shut the door, and you, me, and Dan, it was Jin, DOP, Dan Kircher, the editor, and me, we're going to sit and we're going to line by line the script together. And I was like, okay, that sounds fine, but is it going to take 4 days? Yes, it's going to take 4 days. And what that did, there's me, I'm the writer director. Okay, fine, I've got my notions, obviously. And then there's Jin, who came as a DOP with his notions and his ideas and his creativity and his wealth of experience. And then there's Dan, the editor, who absolutely knows about story. Of course, that's his job to know about story. So those two, Jin described it, it's like these are the three main legs of a stool, if you like, and if any of them drop off, the stool is it's going to fall over because we're either going to disagree while we're shooting or we're going to disagree in the edit. Equally disastrous potentially for a film. So we need to get on the same page, all three of us, before we shoot a frame of not film, but whatever, before we shoot a frame of this story. And by going line by line, everything, talking out the dialogue, talking through all my actions, it resulted in a lot of cuts, things that, like I say, I was thinking, well, that's really important, isn't it? It's really important to have him say, da, 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 da. And the editor would say, no, it's not. Give your audience some credit. It's like they know that, or they're going to figure it out in 10 minutes at this scene. I was like, oh, you think that's enough? Yes, that's enough. Stop it. Okay, gone. That's dialogue is relatively easy to cut anyway, but action and locations and moving a scene or just deleting a scene is the best way to buy yourself more time on the things that matter, on the scenes that matter. Sorry, you
That's
know
great.
this anyway, Kelly, but yeah, I didn't, and it was a really good exercise to do. It's more than an exercise, I'd say. It's a fundamentally crucial part of pre-production is to make at least 2 days, ideally 3 or 4, with you, your DOP, and your editor, and frankly, no one else.
Yeah.
Like politely, respectfully, the producers are not invited because they bring a different agenda to that conversation. This is pure creativity. Not that producers can't be brilliantly creative, but they rightly have their head on the budget as well. We're not talking budget at this stage yet. We're talking, I mean, Jin, for example, or Dan would suggest things to be cut, but not necessarily from a we're going to save money point of view. It was from a that's just narratively or visually unimportant. And I'm buying you extra time to spend on the things that we can finesse or a fight sequence. I'd never directed a fight sequence. They're not even that extensive in my film, but there are fight sequences and they take a long time to do. The moment you introduce an animal, a child, or blood into a scene, you better be ready for everything to slow right down. Because so don't go writing lots of horrifically bloody sequences unless you've got the budget to, or unless you've made sure that you've allocated days on those bloody sequences, because the sequences with lots of blood, sorry, because things just slow
Mhm.
right down. But this is just all things I learned.
Those are great. And then, so you mentioned to try to plan as long of a pre-production time as possible. How long did you have for Mārama?
I mean, sorry, that is not a very useful piece of advice, is it? That's just a bit like saying, have as long as you possibly can for shooting. Of course, everyone wants time, but I suppose what did we have? Charlene was great on this, and I think we had 8 weeks, if not 7 weeks. And that might not be with everyone. Like, obviously, people are staggered in the way they enter the production, depending on their needs. There's not enough money to have every crew member on for 8 weeks of pre-production before you even start shooting anything. But what I mean is, I was there from say week 1 out of 8, and maybe 3 or 4 heads of department, and then by the second week, maybe they're starting to bring in their assistants, and by the third week, we're populating the team. We also didn't shoot on location, so because there are no big Gothic mansions in Aotearoa, New Zealand, so we had to shoot in a studio, and that I suppose bought me selfishly more time because the carpenters were having to put up their flats and mark out the space, and then so and obviously this doesn't apply to all projects, and I was in fact obsessed with shooting Mārama on location. I'd originally thought this is really important that we shoot this film in an actual Gothic mansion, and I wanted to shoot it in England, and I wanted to put our um, lead actor through the same experience, perhaps as she goes through in the story. I'd imagine bringing, in this case, Ariana out from New Zealand and working with her on location in a big house. One of my reference films was a film called Lady Macbeth by William Oldroyd, I think his director's name is. Anyway, that was all. I knew that was all shot in one house, and I'd seen him speak at length about the amazing experience of having the crew and the cast in this location. And it's a film that's set in the 1850s in England in a big Gothic house. So it's like, wow, that's really appropriate for me. Anyway, turns out we couldn't shoot in England. We didn't get the funding to shoot in England. We ended up having to shoot in New Zealand, which I think was a massive blessing in disguise because, well, just the way things worked out, because we worked in a studio. I was dubious about that at first, but actually it turned into a brilliant experience for me. And most of all, we worked we worked with Maori creatives in front of and behind the camera, many more than I would have ever been able to contemplate bringing out from Aotearoa to work with in the UK. So I feel like it became much more, despite the fact that actually we were shooting in New Zealand, a story that's set in North Yorkshire, the Maori elements of the film became much more baked into the film.
Yeah,
Um, but,
that's
but yeah.
That's what I want to talk about is how much did, I've heard you speak about all the research you had to do historically, um, but also, how much did, going to Maori knowledge keepers or the seer you mentioned, how much did they play a role in the creative process and on set?
In the creative process, i.e., the writing of the script, massive role, massive role. They were there to guide me, and they're the experts, you know. So I was sucking up any advice or any kind of nuggets that I could get from them. I would grab them with both hands and bite their arm off. Yeah, because they were talking to me and offering up suggestions of things that I didn't know about because I don't have that lived experience that they do, or that deep knowledge that they do around tikanga, whether tikanga protocol or customs. I didn't know those things, and this you can do a certain amount by just looking it up online and reading around it. But no, there were some suggestions. There's a woman, a female Maori, a Wahine Maori filmmaker called Kath Akuhata Brown, and she was amazing. She had worked as my script advisor on Taumanu, the short film, so we had a bit of a shorthand, so to speak. We had experience of working together, and I knew she made great suggestions because she's amazing with story, but also she's a filmmaker herself. So she'd given me a couple of massive suggestions that changed Taumanu completely. And we did a similar thing as I was just describing the kind of the line by line that I did with the DOP and with the editor. I did the same thing, a line by line with Kath. And she had some amazing offers and suggestions, often around the language, Te Reo Māori, because I don't speak Maori, I don't speak Te Reo. I understand words, but I struggle to put together a sentence. That's just fact. Whereas Kath is embedded, she speaks beautifully, and she gave me, she knew to say certain things. Sorry, not knew to say, but she offered me certain things like the sequence where Mārama and Sir Nathaniel Cole are dancing in the ball in his birthday party, and he's kind of toying with her, I suppose, and being all arch and odious. And she kind of confronts him directly. Who were my parents? I think she says something like that. Who were my parents? And I think I had a line, something like, it wasn't this, but it was equally rubbish. Something like, well, that's for me to know and you to find out, kind of thing. It was silly, but the tone was there. I was trying for the tone, but it wasn't right. And Kath just said, no, you can cut that. I'm going to tell you now. You can use it if you want, but I'm going to tell you what he should say. And it's in the Reo Māori because he does speak the Reo Māori, and it would be appropriate for that question. I was like, yeah, what's that? And she gave me this expression, which is very well-known expression among Māori. Patai ngā pou o te whare. Ask the pillar of the house, the central pillar in a wharenui, a marae wharenui, which often represents the ancestry. So it was like it was a perfect answer for him, riposte for him, who are my parents? Ask the pillar of the house. He's being arch.
Mm-hmm.
He's her dad. He knows it, obviously. She doesn't yet. And it was just such a great line. So Kath was able to offer me things like that. And also she was just able to tell me, not just Kath, but all the advisors were able to say, that's inappropriate, or that's a really bad idea, avoid type thing. So they saved me, and anything people like Kath suggested, I took very seriously and actioned. Yeah. So long answer to your short question. How important were the advisors in writing the script? Crucial. I don't, yeah, I don't think it would have been anything like what I've made without the advice that I took from, as I say, mostly the Wahine Maori, the female Maori advisors that I had on the script. And when it came to the shoot, we had two advisors, Paraone and Ngahuia Kopa. And Ngahuia worked very closely with Ariana on her reo, on her language, on getting the accent correct that she was going to use based on the backstory that we conceived for her character, or that I sort of had imagined for Mary Stevens and Mārama. Um, and and Ngahuia helped. In fact, I think between Ngahuia and Ricky Lee, the co-producer, they worked together, the three of them, on the pivotal moment in the film as well, the performance of the haka, because that wasn't something that was anything to do with me. You know, I'm not in a position to tell Ariana Osborne how to do a haka. I wrote the line was something like Mārama performs a powerful haka full of rage or something. You know, it's like a line in the script. That's it. But it was it was one of the most important lines in the script, and I made that clear. And of course, Ariana knew that anyway. But I just said, you know, this has to be huge because it is. It's huge. So over to you guys. And then I didn't see anything until the actual day of the shoot, actually. So yeah.
Wow.
And when I saw it, when I saw what Ariana and Ngahuia and Ricky Lee had prepared, yeah, I was blown away. You know, it was an amazing take. It was beautiful, and that was it. I was like, wow, that's great. No notes. Do you want to do anything else, or can we call it a wrap? Because we intentionally shot that party sequence over 2 days, building, 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 building towards the pivotal moment. Bang! The release of the haka. I'd kept everyone there for it, so that when she was doing it, she was looking at this horrible gallery of guests um, in blackface, etc. So she'd built towards it over 2 days. She'd witnessed and watched Errol Shan's horrific performance as Jackie Fenton over the hours, over the hours. And so when it came time to deliver that haka, I thought she did it perfectly. But anyway, I said, that's it from me. No notes. Do you want to, can we wrap? She said, hang on a sec. She looked over at Ngahuia, who was in the wings, and Ngahuia pulled her over, and they put their heads together for like 5 seconds, it felt like. But everyone's waiting, the whole studio waiting to see what's going on. And she came back to me and said, just go one more time, please. I was like, of course, yeah. Am I changing anything? Because it's a set frame. Do you need more space? Are you going to move anywhere? No, no, no. I'm going to do it. Just let's go. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to do it. Just ready. I'm ready. So we cleared everything, wiped away, put up a new prop glass, action, bang, smashed the glass, and she did the haka again, and it was even better. And I didn't know what it was, but I was weeping by now. And we wrapped, and of course I had to ask Ngahuia. By the time everyone was sort of like wrapping and moving off, I was like, "What did you say to Ariana?" And she said, "Oh, nothing. I just reminded her to weaponize her dress." I was like, "What?" And she said, just watch the takes. You'll see what I mean. There's only two takes anyway, so of course I watched both takes many, many times, and immediately it became apparent when you watch the first take and the second take. In the first take, it was amazing, but Ariana had not done one thing that they decided she would do, which was grab her dress and weaponize it, using it like a club. And in the second one, in a couple of key moments, she does that, and that's all the difference. But it made all the difference. And again, it was a note that came from a cultural advisor expert, Ngahuia, that I would never have known to give that note. And weaponize the dress, where does that come from? When I spoke to my mother about it, she knew where it came from because my mum has experience growing up and witnessing her elders, the queer, the older women speak on the marae. And mum said when she saw what Ariana was doing with her dress, she was like, "Oh yeah, I knew what she was doing because I've seen it as a kid." It used to. My mum said it used to slightly annoy her that it was always the men that spoke, and when the men spoke, they usually had a taonga, you know, something to hold and to speak with, a staff or a patu, a club. Um, and the women didn't. The women weren't really encouraged to speak anyway. But I mean, that's okay. That's what it was. That's tradition, tikana. But also, the women didn't often have anything to hold. They just didn't. So she said she remembers vividly seeing elderly women mostly but they would grab a handful of the flax of their skirts, of their pew-pews, and they would slap their thighs with this flax when they were making a point. And that's what Ariana does, except she's doing it with a red satin ball gown made of 27 meters of Chinese silk. So,
Incredible. One of the greatest moments of the film.
oh, it's my favorite. I'm biased, but it is my favorite moment.
So good. And then I'm wondering, you've completed the film, it goes out into the world through festivals. You've been to, oh my God, countless festivals all over the world with this film, genre, all sorts of festivals. Um, what were some of the, I guess, key takeaways for you in bringing this film into the festival space?
Um, do you mean in terms of getting it into festivals successfully?
I mean, you can address that as well. That's also helpful.
Yeah, because I would say on that, um, definitely keep in touch with the people that if you're successful in getting onto a program, and like I'm of the mind that I don't know, again, maybe it was just because it was my first script and I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. So I would apply for absolutely everything, any masterclass or any emerging filmmakers program. You know,
Mhm.
I don't even mean that. Um, I'm being respectful. They are emerging filmmaker programs. They're all useful and valid, I would say, except for the ones that charge you a lot of money to apply.
Mhm.
Like avoid those, frankly, because there's enough out there that are free to apply for. And if you get on them, they look after you. And okay, then it might be a case of, well, how am I supposed to get to Berlin? Or how do I get to, especially when you're coming from Aotearoa, New Zealand. But like get there for get the acceptance onto the program and then take it from there. And hopefully you can find a way to get to that program. And sorry, to finish the thought, these were programs that I got onto that were linked with film festivals, notably, first of all, imagineNATIVE, of course. If I got myself onto that, well, in my head, I'm immediately thinking Mārama, if nothing else, I've got to get Mārama into imagineNATIVE as a festival. And it's a brilliant festival, by the way, of course, but and I had the same with I was on the with Mārama, I was on the not on it, I was invited to participate in the co-production market, the Berlinale. So, I kept in touch with the Berlinale. The Zurich International Film Festival has a great program called the Academy. They have a lot of money. They put you up in a hotel, they look after you for 5 days, and you get to hang out, meet other emerging filmmakers, and listen to fabulous masterclasses by directors who have jetted in from wherever to premiere their films in Zurich. It's win-win across the board. Getting onto those programs is super helpful, and then just stay in touch and hopefully position your film in that festival. So I was very intentional. The moment I had something, like it wasn't even a trailer, it was just like a mood reel. I don't think we even had any dialogue in it. It's just a collection of shots. But me and the editor had that, and I was sending that out to everyone and anyone that I knew related to a festival. And the other thing is, these festival people, they all know each other, and if you're halfway reasonable and polite, they want you to succeed as well. They're not like gatekeepers, like we're the only people that are going to show your film. They understand, and it all success feeds on success, I think. So they would some of these, the more generous perhaps minded festival selectors would be like, oh, well, I can bounce this on to my friend in blah, 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 if you like. And yes, please show it to anyone, share it with anyone that you want to. And so by the time we finally had something that was near as damn it a locked off film, I think before we'd even locked the film, I was sending that out to the key festivals. And one of the people that was super supportive and a big not ambassador, so like an ally for the film, because I'm just remembering now. Sorry, yes, of course, Jason Ryle. Is it
Right.
Jason Ryle? Was I think the head of imagineNATIVE oh sorry, maybe a senior um, member of imagineNATIVE when I did the course with imagineNATIVE, and then he's changed. People change their jobs and they move to different places, and he moved to TIFF. So it was completely intentional. I wanted to make sure that Jason got eyes on the film, as soon as it was ready to show him. And thankfully, he liked it, and he programmed it in the discovery section of TIFF. And yeah, it was a dream come true because if you can if you can place your first film in one of the big five feature film slot festivals, which is what are they? Venice, TIFF, Sundance, Berlin, and Cannes, basically. That's a huge rocket boost. But okay, it's not going to happen with everyone. But it just if it does, be ready for lots of requests, and that's what happened to us. Thanks to a premiere at TIFF, suddenly people are asking me or the distributors for a link. It's not me begging them to please have a look at my film. So that was massive to get a premiere at TIFF, and that came via a relationship that I established when I hadn't even finished the first draft of the script. Right. So, and Jason, yeah, he was very helpful, but he's a super busy guy, and he was like, oh yeah, keep in touch. And I just made sure to keep in touch. So, sorry, if there's any advice in all of that ramble, it would just be obviously don't burn any bridges ever because you never know who you might want to keep talking with one day. Don't burn any bridges before you've finished your first film, and even then, don't burn bridges. But just seriously, track who you have been chatting with, and every time you've got something to show them, like ours was just this little collection of images. I think it was sort of a 2-minute teaser, really, like a visual thing. But it was enough for some people to go, oh, I remember that. Yeah, I remember you talking about your Maori Gothic horror. Really? So these are the images. Okay, cool. And then the follow-up question is there anyone else that you think might be interested in it, by the way? Because we think we're going to have a locked print ready to show people within 3 months. And they're like, yeah, sure. Have you thought of ding, ding, ding? No, I hadn't. Great. Do you mind sharing it? Or can you connect me? And then I'll share it directly. So, sorry. In terms of festivals, I suppose it's because I've made 7 short films before I finally made my first feature. So I have been around the festival circuit a fair bit, and frankly, it's a lot harder with short films. I will say that. Trying to get anyone to look at your short film is murder. But if you can do that, and a lot of people that finally get their first feature made have been through the ringer with their short films, I'd say that's the best qualification that you're going to have for finding festivals and placing your feature with a festival. Well, if you've done that successfully with short films, you're on the way. You're probably already doing this stuff instinctually anyway. So maybe that was my case. It's like 7 short films, endless amounts of rejection, and an occasional, yay, I got it into Aspen, yay, or whatever. That those are the things that you hang on when you're making short films. And it's similar. It's a similar world, but actually a lot easier once you've got a feature. It's not easy, sorry, but put it this way, people are a bit more interested than when you have a short film. That's for definite.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I could have talked to you for so much longer. I would love to have talked about Ariana, the set, the incredible set, which I am in love with, the hedge, just fantastic. So the good thing about this panel is that hopefully people leave it and then that night Mārama screens. So hopefully this will all lead into more people sending people to the audience of your fantastic film. But
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like we've covered everything that we could have. And thank you so much. It was great talking to you. And again, I hope to talk to you again for much longer.
Yes, please. Well, thank you so much for listening, Kelly. I feel like I've just been rambling on at you the whole time. And yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. And especially thank you to imagineNATIVE for, yeah, I can't make it any more clear for being there from the very beginning of the conception, is that the right word? The conceiving of the idea of the, yeah, like I say, I had a pretty average treatment, not average, but okay, it was all right. I think the selectors for the imagineNATIVE Indigenous Screenwriting Intensive, I think they were more in like with the idea than the quality of my treatment. I think what they saw was, okay, this idea has potential. He seems like he might be able to pull it off. Let's get him on. But thanks to them, I completed the first draft. So thank you, imagineNATIVE.
They do good work, Imagine.